For starters, I think Elon's odds of buying Twitter, at least the way he wants to buy it, have been going down progressively since this morning when I first heard about this at 6 or 6:15, when it was like, oh, you know what? Maybe he's got a shot at this. And man, it doesn't feel like it right now. For starters, investors don't believe it, right? There's this massive spread between where it closed the day trading and where Elon is offering to buy it. And secondly, this poll he put out at about 4:15 Eastern this afternoon, which wasn't about Twitter users, it was Twitter shareholders. He basically said, who should decide if I get this company or not? Should it be shareholders or should it be the board? Two things about that. First, it feels a little bit desperate. Like that's not the sort of thing you usually post if you think you're about to win. It's kind of like, hey guys, get on my side. And then secondarily, it does seem to reflect that Elon, who is being advised by Morgan Stanley, like real bankers who understand these things, he doesn't seem to have a great understanding of how M&A works, right? There is a way to let shareholders vote on this. Launch a tender offer. It is hard. It takes longer. You have a low probability of winning. But the way Elon did it was he asked the board to accept or to reject this offer. Elon went to the board, thus the board gets to decide. That's how this works.
Now, obviously, we've seen it with Washington Post and some of these smaller media companies, but these big social networks, I guess Twitter's the one that stands out that someone actually could do it. But is it possible someone teams up with Elon and says, hey, the two of us will go in together and do this?
That's possible. I mean, I don't think any of that's new, though, right? Like, I mean, go back 100 years, right? Almost all the newspapers in America, which was, pre-television, that's how we all, or everybody got news, right? Newspapers, that was owned by the richest people in the country. Those papers were owned by the richest people in the country, the Hearsts, et cetera, for a means of influence. And even right now, the reason that Elon or anyone in theory can buy Twitter is because it's really the only or one of the only social networks that doesn't have founder control, right? Like, I mean, Zuckerberg controls Facebook/Instagram/WhatsApp, right? I mean, years ago when it was private, he turned down Yahoo's offer to buy it single-handedly when the board wanted to do it. If somebody came today and said, Mark, we'll give you $1 trillion for Facebook or $5 trillion for Facebook, something obvious, he can say no. He can give the middle finger to the board if he wants to. That's true today. It would be fascinating to know where Jack's head is at on this, because on one hand, he is friendly with Elon. On the other hand, he's not. And on the third part, the whole, Trump got kicked off the network while Jack was running it. And I know he says he delegated that to somebody else, which, by the way, is its own kind of unforgivable sin, not kicking Trump off for keeping him on, but you're the CEO of the company. That should be all. You have to have a say in that. The buck stops with you.
Probably the single most defining thing that's happened in Twitter's history was kicking the president of the United States off the platform. And for him to say he delegated it is, it's kind of malfeasance right there.
He's an entrepreneur. He's got like an ultra concentrated stake in Tesla, which if you look at its actual earnings potential, when you get rid of those like government credits for electric vehicles, doesn't look as great. He's a very sharp guy. And he knows like, it would be nice to have an excuse to cash 40 or $50 billion of my stake out. But if I'm going to do that, like Tesla shareholders are going to ask what is going on. And so if you create a nice little smokescreen that gives you a logical reason as to like why you should shell $50 billion of your stake, it's a pretty sweet deal. It's a great, I don't think he really cares about buying this company or not, but it's a really good way to say, you know what, I'm selling my share to make this bid look more real.
Dan, what do you think about that?
Tesla stock was down about 3.5% today or something like that, because there's obviously some concern about it. I will say the only disagreement I have with Zach is I think he cares. I don't know if he cares about buying Twitter per se. I think he legitimately cares about his view of free speech and social media. I think that's something that actually does animate him. I don't think he has thought through what any of that really means.
Someone said this is sort of the problem with Elon. And I was listening earlier, Dan, you were moderating a Twitter space, and it's similar to Donald Trump in a lot of ways of like, do you take him at his word in a very literal sense, or how much of this is like eight moves ahead chess? And you sort of oscillate back and forth between what's just impulsive, childlike, whatever mindset versus what's actually a strategic game here. And I feel like the Occam's razor here is that he kind of wants to own it, and maybe he can. And so he made an impulsive decision, talked to a banker and said, fuck it, let's do it. The interesting angle, which we talked a little bit about before we got on this, but the Silver Lake angle in all of this is interesting, right? Because William Morris, or Endeavor, was a shared board seat between Egon Durbin and Elon Musk, right? It was funny when the funding secured thing, Silver Lake never offered up any financing itself, but they were advising Elon, quote unquote, on that whole process. And so it's pretty clear these guys are close. Now, they made an investment in Twitter, what was it, 18 months ago, a year ago, along with Elliott, right?
Elliott, yeah.
Yeah. And so now So now Egon is both in the boardroom, but presumably pretty close with Elon. And so I wonder, is it possible there's a fox in the hen house there that's actually influencing this from the inside, saying, hey, Elon, you might as well do it? Or again, back to your Jack Dorsey thing, it's hard to know who's on what side in this sort of Game of Thrones battle. When we're talking about this in 6 months' time, in a year time, is Twitter a public company or a private company?
I think it's still a public company, but man, I think there could be some changes. This is going to be a very hard thing for this management team to deal with because, as somebody said, they have a lot of work to do, right? They've got a lot to do. And this is a massive distraction for employees, for them, it's just this massive distraction. And I don't think Elon's not the type to simply take his ball, go home and move on to something else. He's going to keep hitting them, and he's going to hit them from their own platform, which is brutal, right? He's not going on talk shows doing it. He's doing it on Twitter.
The best part about that for him is he owns 10% of it.
For now.
He's bringing attention to this thing he now owns, $5 billion of it. Seems like a great business model to me. The guy's got it figured out. Just bring attention, buy up some shares, bring a whole bunch of attention to it. Maybe I buy it, maybe I don't. At least I get to diversify my Tesla shares. He's kind of genius. Best thing I ever learned in all of this is once you have an idea, however shitty that idea may be, and trust me, our first ideas were very shitty, just pitch it. And then we would hear from people well, this doesn't work, and here's why. And those threads were interesting, and we would pull on them and kind of get a little bit deeper into the weeds. We learned the terminology, we built the network. And one thing Nat and I had a good little tag team going was, one of us would be talking, the other one would be taking notes, and vice versa. And every meeting we would ask for 3 intros, we'd get a follow-up meeting. I just think of it as systematically working through social networks. And it's tedious, but it works. It just takes a fairly long time. So it's kind of the only thing I've ever been good at, actually, is that. So I just try and do it more often. So let me just kind of play that back for you for a second. So I go to this company, I write them an equity check that doesn't really matter because I don't care about it. I get a first look distribution at a coin that nobody else can buy. And then I take that coin and I list it publicly so that retail can buy it and bid it up.
Yeah, that's right.
Does that sound like a security to you? Because that sounds like a security to me.
Yeah. And when you say it in that tone, it sounds like a little Ponzi scheme, MLM-ish.
I thought that was the branding. Look, I'm not suggesting they're doing anything wrong by any means, but I think it's pretty clear that these tokens are securities. And if they're not being regulated as such today, they will be because they're being monetized just like it.
Oh, for sure.
I don't know if you guys do crypto. I mean, I always look at crypto investing as, is it an interesting enterprise software idea? And that's what drives me to be interested or not. But the idea that you're essentially buying the equity, but you're getting the coin value, there's just something that doesn't sit right about that to me, because you're passing that risk off to retail at the end of the day. Am I wrong?
It's the hammer kind of looking for the nail. I think everyone agrees this is very interesting utility, but the reason you're not seeing equity value appreciation in mass is because it's all speculation on the token side.
And to be clear, I'm all for speculate all you want on a token, on a coin. I don't really give a shit about what you're speculating on. But if you are passing that risk off to a retail investor without proper disclosures and they're not an informed investor in this process, that's why we have the SEC. That's why we have rules, because people used to do this and take advantage of the average person financially. And it just hasn't kind of come full circle yet.
So what I think is interesting about this is there's this foundational disagreement, right? If you remember back in December when Mark Andreessen and Jack Dorsey got into their little Twitter spat back and forth, and then Chris Dixon weighed in and they were blocking each other. And that was kind of the beginning of Mark Andreessen coming back on Twitter and all the block memes and all that stuff. And it was the root of the whole thing is basically you have two sides of this argument, right? On the one side are people like Jack Dorsey that are Bitcoin maximalists that say, hey, we all have to rally around Bitcoin because that's the only way this is going to be able to replace the fiat currency and provide all the utility that we see in the future, right? And then on the other side are Mark Andreessen and Chris Dixon, who have profited in a very meaningful way from all these different coins. And Bitcoin as a technology has a ton of limitations from what you can actually do from a utility standpoint, right? The amount of energy that it consumes, the amount of you can't actually trade NFTs or things like that using Bitcoin. And so I think what Jack Dorsey says, he said on Twitter, is that crypto is being controlled. Web3 is controlled by VCs because all these firms are making so much money off of these pre-investment, tokens that they're getting, right? And that it's not actually, it has this very interesting kind of ethos of democratization and decentralization because the technology has all that, but the profits aren't actually accruing to the individuals, right? The profits of all these new coins are accruing to a small subset of privileged buyers, right? Which is this weird paradox that exists in the crypto ecosystem.
It's odd that the multi-level marketing scheme kind of like accrues value to the top, which is exactly by design. I mean, the whole decentralization thing, and I'm not an expert in this, but can you name me one successful scale decentralized organization in the history of the world? Like successful, maybe what, the United States of America? Is that our like efficiency example there?
That's what I was about to say is I feel like the answer to any question like that is like someone comes back with, well, what about organized religion? Right. And I like, that's just like the end all argument. And then you either cancel yourself one way or that seems like the answer.
Every time I hear about some like egalitarian society, it always ends up as an HBO special about some cult leaders, like in jail for a sex thing.